So hopefully you've been practicing your scales. But one of the problems that you run into when you practice your scales just up and down is that when it comes time for a solo, you end up just playing up and down the scale, which works but isn't really that interesting. So one of the great little techniques you can practice is to practice scale patterns instead of just up and down the scale. This is good for plenty of reasons. Mainly, you're going to have more things to do when you're soloing instead of just going up and down. You'll have interesting ways of going up and down that scale. But also, scale patterns will really challenge your left hand and your right hand coordination, and it's about as good a practice as you can do for your just raw technique, alternate picking and economy picking through strange scale patterns. Very, very, very good exercise. So what I want to do is talk about some very simple scale patterns with our pentatonic minor shape that we can start throwing into our solos, and that'll also help us improve our technique at the same time. So when you're doing scale patterns, there's two things to think about. What is my actual scale pattern? And also, what rhythm am I using to play that pattern? So am I playing it as eighth notes? Am I playing it as triplets, 16th notes, etc.? So this first pattern I'm going to show you, we're going to try and think of it as a triplet phrase because it's set up to really be groupings of 3 notes at a time. So here's what I'm doing. Imagine if all of your notes on a pentatonic scale were just lined up like this. What we're going to do is we're going to take the highest note we can play, and we're going to just descend through 3 notes. So 1, 2, 3. Then we'll back up 1 note and we'll go down 1, 2, 3. And then we'll back up 1, 2, 3, back 2, 3, back 2, 3. And what that looks like on our guitar, here I'll be in A pentatonic minor. And I'm in A pentatonic minor because the jam track I'll be playing along with is in A minor. And you can see the link in the description to get to that jam track. So I'm starting at the highest note of A pentatonic minor, which is my 8th fret here. And then I'm going to descend through 3 notes. 1, 2, 3. Now I come back up 1 note. 1, 2, 3, and then back up 1 note. 1, 2, 3, back 2, 3, back 2, 3. And that is a 3-note phrase. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to pretend like these are triplets. And I'm going to count 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet. And then I want to have a 3 beat there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this note right here. That's just an extra A right there. And that way when I'm practicing this, I have a downbeat that I can kind of sync up to. I know that if I hit that note right on the 3 beat, then I know I was somewhat close to being in time. It's kind of hard to time the last note of a triplet, so I like to add that little note here to the end of the entire pattern. So the whole thing again. All right. Now, I'm not going to walk you through the technique on this. Essentially, learn the pattern and practice very, very slowly until you can pick up the speed. There's plenty of videos out there on alternate picking technique, and I don't want to get too far into this. These videos are kind of aimed for people that already know how to play the guitar, but are struggling to play good solos, and, you know, taking all of your technique and actually applying it. So if you're looking for how to play that fast, there's other videos out there that can help you out with that. So now that we have a triplet phrase, what I want to do is just try applying it. But really quick, we should be practicing it the other way too. Anytime you learn one of these patterns, make sure you're practicing it in both directions. So if I started at the bottom, I'll come up 3 notes, and then I'll descend 1 note, and then I'll come back up 3 notes, and then I'll come back up 3, back up 3, back, and so on and so on. It'll look like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then once again, I'm going to add 1 extra note, just so it gets me back on a downbeat, so I have something to sync up to. So I'm going to press play on the minor blues jam track, and I'm going to try doing the pattern all the way up. I'll do the pattern all the way down, and then I'll do a few things where I just do bits and pieces of the pattern. I might start on the 5th string and do the pattern just halfway up, maybe start on the 2nd string and do the pattern halfway down, and maybe even do really little tiny pieces of the pattern. Like, what if I just singled out the middle part here? Right? That's part of the pattern, and it might sound really good in the middle of a solo. I could repeat that over and over again. So these patterns aren't always meant to be played constantly up and down. Sometimes you can just isolate little parts of it and get some really good stuff out of it. So let's hear what that sounds like. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4. Back up. And now I'll just do little bits and pieces of it. So the triplets are a little much. I wouldn't always keep doing triplets over that, but since this is a triplet pattern, that's kind of what we're stuck with right now, is just practicing it up and down with triplets. However, this can be really complicated, but I do want you to also try and practice this exact same pattern phrased as 16th notes. It is going to be quite a workout, but you have to really kind of flip your brain around and count that entire pattern while you're counting 16th notes at the same time. So your fingers will play the pattern, but your mouth will count 16th notes. It'll sound like this. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and I'm ending on an and right there. So if you can train yourself to really feel what a 3-note phrase feels like when you're playing them as 16th notes, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and, then you have access to this exact same pattern phrased as 16th notes. And listen to what that sounds like. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4. Now on the way back up. 1, 2, 3. So that's pretty weird right there, doing a 3-note phrase as 16th notes. But if you practice it slow and kind of hear it in your head a bunch of times, you'll start getting the feel for it and you can start using it in the middle of your leads. I want to do another triplet pattern here with you that you can also use as a 16th note. This one I think is much easier. And essentially, instead of thinking of notes, I'm just thinking of strings. All I'm going to do is I'm going to descend through three strings of my scale. Then I'll just back up a string, and I'll descend through 3 strings, and then back up a string, and then down 3 strings. So it'll be like this. Here's my highest note, and I'm going to come down 3 strings. All right? And then I'm going to come back to my second string and go down 3 strings. Back to my third string, back up a string, and then once again, I'll just end it with an extra note right there, so I'm right on a beat, okay, with that extra A there. So here's what it sounds like. And once again, we'll try this as triplets first. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1. And then later on, we'll try it as 16th notes. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3. All right? So let's take a listen to that. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4. Back up. 3 triplet 4. And now I'll play them as 16th notes. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4. Back up. All right, pretty cool stuff. So both those patterns we did were revolving around 3s, right? Triplets or groupings of 3. I want to give you a longer pattern. I consider this like an 8-note pattern. And essentially, without describing it, I'll just show you the tab here. It is repeating, though. So once you do all 8 notes, you essentially repeat the same pattern on the next 2 strings and on the next 2 strings. And here's what it looks like. We're going to have 1 E and a 2 E and a. And then we repeat that same idea starting on the second string. 1 E and a 2 E and a. And then again, starting on the third string, 1 E and a 2 E and a. All right, and then once again, I'm going to add that extra A in there because it gets me on a beat. So let's hear what that entire pattern sounds like. Now, I'm doing some legato in there with all these patterns. I recommend you do them both ways. Practice it with strict alternate picking, but also practice it with the hammer-ons and pull-offs as well, because they're 2 completely different feels, and sometimes it might be easier or harder to actually play it with or without hammer-on. So really recommended to make sure you're balancing your practice with and without hammer-ons on these. Today, I'll just, I guess I'll do it with picking just to keep it consistent here. And on the way up, we can do pretty much the same pattern. All right, since it's already set up for 8 notes, it's going to be very easy to apply it as 16th notes as long as you have the speed developed. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to play that pattern, all right? I'll be doing that 16th note pattern, and then I'm going to start just trying to throw in all the other patterns we've talked about here today for this last solo to be kind of like a conglomeration of all those things. And occasionally, I might not do anything pattern-based. I'm going to try to just really just drown this with pattern stuff just so you can hear how efficient it can be. But with all things, I think it's all about balance, all right? It's not about just doing patterns. You want a lot of stuff in between there. But for this solo, just to demonstrate, I'll show you all those patterns crammed together. 2, 3. So, a lot of different ideas there, all right? We can do all those different patterns, mix and match them, take them whenever we please. And as long as we practice them ahead of time, I definitely recommend use your metronome, all right? Practice all this stuff without a jam track first, just so when you're in a jam track, you've already got those rhythmic cycles practiced when you're only focusing on the beat. You're not focusing on the chord, you're not focusing on anything else other than when does my note get played. So, in my opinion, it's about as good a practice as you can do as a lead guitar player. Learn some patterns, it stretches out and exercises your alternate picking, and it gives you all this stuff that at any point in time as a lead player, you can just call that stuff up. You can say, oh, I want to go into triplets now. I want to go into 16th notes now. And you already have this stuff like pre-designated just to play those rhythmic cycles. Instead of having to think that fast, instead of thinking at 16th note speed, which can be really, really difficult, and I completely struggle with, I don't really have to think that fast because my fingers are doing the thinking for me. They've already practiced these patterns millions of times. So hopefully this gives you some ideas on how to start practicing your lead sequences. And one thing I want to mention, if you have any specific questions, please let me know. I won't run out of lesson ideas anytime soon, but I certainly want to make sure that I'm catering to anything that you feel is confusing or difficult. So please drop me a line, send me an email, or contact me on Twitter or Facebook or something, just so, if you have any questions, I can maybe make a lesson and a video specifically about what you are having problems with. All right? Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.